So my name's Beth Rudolf. I am Director of Delivery for the Conveyancing Association. I am a qualified conveyancer, but I'm also co-chair of the Home Buying and Selling Group and the Digital Property Market Steering Group. So that's me, but let me introduce you. Well, no, in fact, let me get the panelists to introduce themselves to you. So we'll start with Mike Harlow, who you'll notice we haven't got him on camera. That's because the technology ain't working for him, despite all efforts. So, Mike, who are you and where are you from?
Yes, I am. I am really here. Sorry, I think it's our security measures that stop the camera from working. I'm Mike Harlow. Like Beth, I was also once somebody who could convey property, although I mostly did some residential, but mostly commercial property. And I'm now the Director of Customer Strategy and the Deputy Chief at Land Registry. Shall I go to Kate?
Hello, my name is Kate Faulkner and very simply Chair of the Home Buying and Selling Group.
And hi everyone, I'm John Reynolds. I'm COO of a company called Coadjute, and we're a data exchange platform for the property market. I'm also a member of the Home Buying and Selling Group and a member of the Open Property Data Association, and that's the hat I'm going to be wearing this afternoon.
Thank you very much, everybody. John, I suspect that there's a lot of people in our audience going, what on earth is the Open Property Digital Data Association and what's that got to do with me? Can you take us back to basics and explain actually what it is that the Open Property Data Association does and why we need that sort of thing?
Yeah, I suppose I could start that, Beth, by maybe just talking a little bit about the sort of problem that we have with data. What's the problem we're trying to solve? I've been doing a lot of research on the property market. I've been trying to establish, when did the sort of fragmentation we have today arise? And I sort of lots of reading, or even went back to the Land Registration Act. I think it was 1862 or something. But there's a passage in there where it says that the buyer and the seller can go along to the Land Registry office with their agents and there and then execute the transaction and update the register. And I thought that's interesting, isn't it? That there was a time when property transacting, or at least completing it, could be like really simple. And in itself, it is a relatively simple thing. And sort of I plotted it forward and thought, when did things start to sort of get fragmented? And I think it was at the beginning of the sort of 2000s with the internet. And you think about what happened with the internet, we sort of dematerialized. We call it dematerialized things. So we dematerialized deeds and we put them in Land Registry. We dematerialized money and we put it in the banking system. We dematerialized, contracts and we put them into Word effectively. And we dematerialized identity. But that process that we call dematerialization, what does it mean? It means that we took things that were physical and we put them in a database. And the act of putting them in a database, you have to sort of represent them. You have to sort of turn them into something a machine could understand. And so Land Registry did that in their part. The banking system did that in their part. And people who had forms, let's say the Law Society, would have done that in their part. So, and identity, of course, the banking system create an identity for you. If you log onto a conveyancing platform, it will have an identity for you. So what we ended up doing, if you sort of go back to this sort of imaginary room in 1862, is everybody in that room, what's the unifying thing? The unifying thing is the English language. Everybody in the room can speak English. All the documents are in English, the deeds are in English, the currency is sterling, identities are in English, so everything can connect and interact. And then you roll forward to the internet, and nothing interoperates. It's like basically all of these things were dematerialized and turned into different languages. And really that's the problem that we've been grappling with. And so what does that mean? What does that look like? Well, we know in an industry when the machines speak the same language, when there is a common data model, we know what that feels like. So if we think about payments as an example, you've got a process there, multiple banks involved in a payment, or let's say two banks. Beth, if I wanted to send you £10 now, I'd say, give me your account details. And you'll say, this is my sort code and this is my account number. I won't even have to ask you for your sort code and account number. You'll know that's the data standard. That's what I'm expecting from you. And if I asked anyone else on this call, they would give me the same information, the same data. Yet we could all have different banks. right? So we've got all our different banks, and so it's the financial services industry have come together to agree data standards so you can send payments seamlessly between lots of different banks. And they've also got an identity framework. So like your bank knows who you are, my bank knows who I am, and I can send you money and you know it's come from me and I know it's come to you. And now if you look at an industry that doesn't have a data standard, like the property industry, there's no way to send data from one system to another system easily. And it's like being back in that room. Imagine all these people in this room speaking different language. What would you have to do? You'd have to bring a whole bunch of interpreters, and you'd have to keep checking and retranslating things. And that's really the current state of the property market from a data point of view. And so that's what we're trying to solve. We're trying to say, right, can we develop a data standard for the property industry? And so I'll just wrap up by sort of talking for a couple of minutes about how we think about that. If you think about the English language, back in that room, the English language, what's good about it? It's free, it's open. I can speak it and nobody's going to charge me for it. And so with a data standard, it needs to be open and free as well, in so much that, can you imagine if I said, well, why don't you all use my data standard? If Coadjute had a private data standard, everyone uses that. That'd be dangerous for everyone else, because once you start using it, when it becomes the norm, I could say, well, now I'm going to charge you. So every time you utter a word of English, I'm going to charge you a penny. That'd be a nice model for me, but it wouldn't be good for everyone else. So it's got to be open, like the English language, and like the English language, anyone can take their own version of it and change it and start, speaking slang or anything you want. That's all fine. It's an open language. So with data, we're trying to create an open language, and therefore the way we do that is through collaboration. We recognise that all of the machines in the industry today are configured to speak a slightly different language, and so through the home buying and selling group, we came together and said, okay, so can we devise a common language for the machines? And what we took was the BASPI form, and we said, okay, well, it's got a buyer as a thing on there, seller, the property address, etc. We said, how do we convert that into a common language that machines will understand? And so we did that, and then we started looking at lots of other forms, and that was within the context of the home buying and selling group. And from there, we thought, well, okay, this language that we're creating, this data language, needs to be owned, needs to be governed, it needs to be looked after. And so we formed something called Open Property Data Association. Anyone can join, and really it's just a body of people who are coming together, who are going to collaborate on taking this standard forward, because the language will need to expand, like the English language. As the world changes, new words are introduced, aren't they, all the time into the English language. So as the data model expands beyond BASPI, it will now look at mortgages, and that'll be a whole new set of words that sort of data dictionary will need. And you'll have seen recently that Lloyd's have joined, which is super exciting. So the Open Property Data Association, really a collective of people in industry, everybody's welcome to join, working on that common data model, that common language that machines can speak. And so the punchline in terms of what does this mean? This means for buyers and sellers that they'll be able to have a much more seamless journey, like sending a payment from one person to another. You should be able to send data from your estate agent to your conveyancer, one conveyancer to the other conveyancer, and just reuse the data. So that's a very quick overview of sort of data and what we're trying to achieve.
That's fabulous, John. Thank you so much. At last, I understand what data standards are all about now. I suppose the question is, what is the possible, though? Mike, what is possible, do you think, if we can get all the data standardized and enable everything to talk to each other? Is there anything that we can look to see where that has been achieved? Are you there, Mike? Oh.
Sorry, double muted. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes, that's brilliant. Great. Well done.
Sorry, I'm gonna start that with where John took us to initially, actually, which is all the way back to 1862, because at that time, as you say, John, there wasn't a lot of information, and there also wasn't a lot of requirements on people to check things. There was a lot more risk, really, and people actually inspected the property themselves, didn't they? So what we've got now is a lot more information and a lot more compliance requirements. And one of the things that the Land Registration Act in 2002, well over 20 years old now, tried to do was establish a more seamless process for everybody sharing information across the whole of the transactions, related transactions too. Now, we could probably spend an awful lot of time wondering what happened to the efforts to make that a reality in the intervening years, but the legislation is still there. So we still have the legislative framework to make this happen. What's interesting is to think then, why hasn't it happened? And when you, as a land registry, we're interested in this because for two reasons. We are a funnel where a lot of almost all transactions end up. So we are part of the process. If we're not digital and working in a way that supports an efficient and effective marketplace, then that's going to be a problem. So we need to be a part of the answer. We can provide part of the answer by the information that we provide. And also we need to work in tandem with everybody else to make sure it actually all plumbs together, adopts the same data standards, and everything works as best as it could, like we know when we see it. I think Kate will cover this. Other sectors like the banking sector, where it is just far easier to deal with things. So part of the joys of my job is talking to other land registries and other jurisdictions. And what's very noticeable is how not only is some of those land registries ahead of us in terms of progressing towards more automation, more digital ID checking, etc., but the whole sector, the whole marketplace is very different. Often you'll hear them say, sorry, you mentioned a chain there. What's a chain? And you have to explain to them what a chain of transactions is in this country, because everything is so much easier to get done that no one gets anxious about linking transactions together, because they don't worry so much or anything like as much about the time it's going to take to sell or buy. And the conclusion I've reached and tested with these other jurisdictions is that, simply put, if if everyone knows as much as needs to be known about the property, the parties, the terms of the deal, and its progress at all times, if that picture is shared, and why wouldn't it be shared? If everyone wants this to happen, it's a consensual transaction. If everybody has that same information, and that information is as good as it can be about the property, the parties, the terms, and its progress, then think how much faster things would happen. Because the work of the lawyer can get, on whether this is actually what their clients want to buy, can start immediately, because they have immediate access to information about the property. They know the terms of the deal, so they can immediately start crafting the contract and the transfer, and etc. And they know who everybody is, so that they can. There's no question of worrying about due diligence and trust, and no one has to chase everyone, because everyone can see what stage the process is at. If everyone has that same access to that same shared information, so much of the grind, of the to and fro, and of the doubt and worry and anxiety slips away. And what you have is a transaction that is naturally faster, but it goes at the pace that the parties want it to. And that, I think, is the reason, that's the objective that drives the vision for, common data standards and common connectivity that John was talking about. And it does happen. It has happened in other jurisdictions. It has taken quite a bit of investment, and it takes investment of two types, really. One is investment in the data itself, because it's converting that from the formats that have it's been written up into takes a lot of effort. The local land charges program that we're working our way through demonstrates that. We went to the Scilly Isles, and they handed over literally a manuscript book, a handwritten book, as part of their records of local land charges, and converting that into digital data is just it's just hard yards. And the other is people collaborating with a common objective in mind, because if we are going to work together and produce the sort of open shared network that John described, you can only do that if you collaborate. That was the strong advice from several jurisdictions, particularly Norway. They said you need everybody to line up. And the home buying and selling group is a fantastic example of that. It is a very open, straightforward, collaborative group. And we formed another group, not to kind of dislodge it or compete with it, but to bring in a couple of other aspects, which is the Digital Property Market Steering Group. And we did that because we saw that actually if you don't also embrace the way that other parts of the property market, commercial, infrastructure, agriculture, etc., then the problem is that you are sharing the same data, you're often sharing the same professionals. If you don't build a system that works for that too, then one is going to trip the other up. So we really wanted to make sure that the home buying and selling process efficacy is something that is both learned from, adopted in other parts of the property market, so that you get sort of harmony of approach, and therefore it's more likely to succeed. And so that's really the kind of aim behind the agenda for the Digital Property Market Steering Group, which we can talk about more later. But it's not there. It's there to support, add, and remove barriers from the activities of the home buying and selling group in this arena. Thanks, Beth.
That's fabulous, Mike. Thank you so much. And everybody's been putting questions in the chat. Please do continue putting questions in the chat because it's really helpful. But Mike, I'm going to throw a couple of those questions at you now. So the first one is from Sam. And he says, or she says, they say, there we go, the Law Society controls access to the standard conditions of sale and the TA forms via their copyright. Will that change in future? Will that impact it, Mike?
Well, I think that's kind of a question for the Law Society. I am a member, but I can't speak on behalf of it. What I would say is that everyone who joined the steering group, and the Law Society is a member of the steering group, is clearly committed to the vision. I think the role of the Law Society is super important in making sure that we have professional standards about how we conduct a conveyance. That is what we're talking about here is not how do you do a conveyance professionally so that clients, there is consumer protection, clients are well advised. What we're talking about is the efficacy of the machine, if you like. How efficient and fast can it be? So they're not in conflict in principle. I know the Law Society, shares the same vision for the future. So that's something. If that is a true impediment, then clearly we need to make sure that we find a way of preserving the professional role which everyone needs in order to be well advised and protected as a consumer, alongside developing an efficient and digital system.
Thanks, Mike. And of course, as John mentioned earlier, we have got the buying and selling property information data set, which gathers together all of the information digitally and can pre-populate those TA forms. So that shouldn't impact the Law Society or their copyright, because of course it means their forms can be completed from web pages, which is great. There's another question for you, Mike, which is, no one is talking about chains. This causes delays, and other jurisdictions don't have leasehold. They still have problems with dodgy developers. Any thoughts on that?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question about chains.
Well, I think Zara is saying that no one's talking about chains and they cause delays, but I suppose the reality is that actually if we get all of the information available up front, the only chain element is being able to move from one property to the next on the day of completion. So it's more about lining up the completion dates, because you can exchange contracts when everybody's ready.
Yes. So look, no one thinks that chains are something you should outlaw. People, it's people's attitude that's interesting. So in Norway, no one conceives. People do think about lining up their transactions so the sale and the purchase happen on the same day, but they never contractually link them, because they they don't feel they have to, because it is a matter of, a handful of weeks between, before you decide you want to buy somewhere and you find it and you move in. So everyone is happy to contemplate bridging finance or, a period in temporary accommodation, rather than thinking I'll somehow contractually link the two. So the point about chains is not to say they're a bad thing. It's to say you can get it to the point where it's so relatively easy to go through the process that people don't feel that anxiety and that need to link the two contractually. And I just think that shows you that we're not just talking about making things slightly faster or slightly cheaper. We're talking about making them so dramatically easier that people's perception of what it is like and what's involved in buying a property changes. And it significantly lightens the load on what is otherwise regarded as the third or fourth most stressful thing in your life.
Thanks, Mike. That covers it brilliantly. And actually, in Australia, in the vendor disclosure states, that's a classic example of where, because they've got information up front, they're able to do reservation agreements. So they absolutely don't have chains in the way that we think of them, but they do move from one property to the next. But I'm going to use that reference to Australia as a segue to Zara's next question, which is, when is the Land Registry going to allow access to systems like that they have in Australia, like PEXA? Is that on the cards?
Well, it depends what you mean, like PEXA. So we do have access. There are systems that can link into Land Registry at the moment through application process interfaces. So the APIs, it's Business Gateway. So if you use a system like InfoTrack, you can make your applications through InfoTrack. Or and other suppliers are available. There's plenty of them, TM Group, etc., etc. So that what we want to do is enable those to become more sophisticated, more interactive. Our vision, and we will be investing more in the ability for those system providers, those casework providers, to hook into Land Registry, so that when a lawyer is instructed, even, they could ping Land Registry, as the system in PEXA, as the PEXA system in Australia does, say, I intend to do this transaction. What would be your information requirements? And we could come back with a list of things that would need to be true in order for the application to go through. And essentially that brings those dreaded things, requisitions, to the front of the transaction. It flushes out any risks, and it means that by the time you get to the completion day, frankly, it's just a matter of pressing buttons and processing, rather than any question of a to and fro and doubt about how you're going to get the registration secure. So that is something we wish to enable, and it's not about just enabling it within a direct Land Registry service. It's about enabling it with a diverse providers of casework systems that could, themselves specialize in the commercial market or the residential market and so forth. But that's for them to decide. That's for the market to sort out. What we want to do is enable it through the sort of plug and play services that we'll make open to these providers.
That's fabulous, Mike. Thank you. And certainly, PEXA is going to require things like the real-time gross settlement system, a software update that's coming from the Bank of England. So that's not just down to Land Registry, but the idea of notional registers that means that you know exactly what your client is going to get once the transaction goes through is magical. And that would certainly stop, as you say, all of that wasted money that us conveyancers have with requisitions. And I think, as a conveyancer, taking some time to look at the upstream activity and making sure that all of the workflow systems enable the downstream activities, to go through really straightforwardly post-completion is magical. And I do think we probably don't spend enough time thinking about what we do during the beginning of the transaction and the impact that has on how much wasted time there is in dealing with requisitions. But Kate, tell us what the consumer is going to think of this all going digital instead of getting bits of paper.
Yeah, I think it's from a consumer perspective, they'll just kind of take things as they are. And I think what I would like to do first is just stand back a bit from all of this. A lot of my background is in new product development. And one thing I've learned when you launch new products is that the chances of you getting it right first time is really, really hard. And I think it's easy to have conversations like we have today, but it's also easy to forget what's actually going on in the background. This is the biggest new product development in the property industry, from lender through to removal company, that has ever been seen. And to pull it off is huge. We've got 6 government departments that we have to get on board. We've got the industry, from everybody has to get on board. But also the two that are forgotten is we need to get the media behind us, and we also need to get consumers behind us. And we have to get all 4 of those. Now, when I was launching new products, you just have to worry about the consumer, or you just have to worry about the industry. You didn't have to worry about all of these other, getting the governments on board, for example, government on board. So this is an enormous task. And when you look, I did a presentation the other day to conveyancers about my background, which is in food, and how easy it was in the 90s, because we just built massive supermarkets and everybody just came once or twice a month with their trolleys, and they went home again, and they might pop out for the odd meal and maybe spring for the odd coffee. And then I kind of wrote a list of all the different ways that we consume food today, and it was massive when I started, and it's all happened and I never really thought about it. But we order it online. We're moving away from supermarkets to smaller shops. You can have Uber Eats. You can have stuff turning up at your door and you don't ever have to go shop, and you can still cook like a chef. And kind of all of that stuff has happened, and we just decide which way we kind of want to work with it. But the interesting thing that I had when we were presenting that was I thought, well, why is that all so easy, and why is it so difficult for us? And one of the things that I kind of took out, and I love our market because we learn every day, and I certainly learn new things every day, is that actually one of the difficulties with our market is not only are you heavily regulated, everybody from lender through to removal company pretty much is very regulated. So all the communication that we can have and the different ways we can communicate, absorb and shop and do what we do, it's really easy to do, but not in our market, because it has to be shared to so many people, but it also has to be regulated and, most importantly, trusted. So I think it's really important just to put into context how enormous it is that we're trying to do, which is why it's taken such a long time to kind of get to this point where we can come and talk to everybody about it. And we will get things wrong. We will absolutely, I wonder where I put my phone. We will get things wrong. And it's not going to be perfect from day one. So please don't expect a system to come along. It's absolutely fantastic. There will be loads of things that go wrong with it. But you've got the 2 big questions that have been asked is, can it be trusted? And I come back to that. Well, you look at the banking info and you look at how we've all moved on to apps. And I never used to. I bank with First Direct, and I always call them. Always called them. Never wanted to do online banking. Didn't like it. Didn't trust it. But you know what? I love an app. And so when it moved to an app, that was my thing, and I enjoy that. And I still call them every now. If it's a big transaction, bought a property recently, I was on the phone every 5 minutes. I can't do transactions more than £1,000 myself. It scares the living daylights out of me. So I call people. So the important thing is, I think, with the work that's being done, this is being done, as I understand it, to the same level that the banking industry did their did the work to make into open banking. That is the experience and knowledge, and it has to be, because there are lenders involved. So we have to get it right, and the level that we're trying to get it right is about, as I understand it, as high as you can. Nothing will ever be 100% correct. So we have to then look at, how do we protect the consumer? That might be insurance, that might be something else, but all of those things are being looked at. So it's a big job. Can you trust the data when you start seeing all of this come through? The answer is yes, but it won't always be correct. And therefore we have to have protections for consumers when that does happen. The other thing that people have asked is, well, what happens when it gets hacked? Do you know what? It's a first world problem. And for me, I asked the question, well, is it worth doing all of this knowing that actually it's going to go wrong spectacularly at some point? Let's be honest, it already does. There's already been hacked problems, but the banks have problems, and it falls over every now and again, and that's caused payment issues. You all have been through that. So the question is, well, is it worth that risk? And my view is, yes, it is. And one of the biggest reasons it's worth that is because I don't believe it's fair to ask this industry, through no control of its own, to move 800,000 people one year and then move 1.6 million the next, when it takes 5 years or more to train and have the knowledge that surveyors, conveyancers, agents, etc. have to have. That is always going to be our market. I don't know any market that suffers in the way we do, that expects such expertise. I don't know that anybody in this industry can go through 2021 again, and neither should you. And unless we get this through, that's the only way I think we can cope as an industry moving forward. There was a question as well about, well, what happens when it's disputed? Well, data that will get disputed, well, that's why we need you. That's why we need surveyors. That's why we need the experts. That's why we will always need people on the ground. And I think that's a really important thing to bear in mind. And I think the other question, which I have taken as a takeaway today, is people said, well, what happens when it goes out of date? Well, that's a really interesting one for two reasons. One, we should do something about that. Had a case the other day. Somebody's trying to sell a shared ownership property. They're now on to their third valuation because it's taking so long. That shouldn't be happening. We need to take that away. That's wrong, and we have to fix that. But we have to fix that from lender, agent, broker, everyone. We've got to fix it along that chain, and that's the work that we try and do as the Home Buying and Selling Group. So I will pick that up. But of course, and it's people like Beth, Mike, John answer this better than I, is surely if we have all of this data digitized, actually the updating will be much more often, and therefore that should take away some of the pain of the information going out of date. So we can work out what's always going to be a problem going out of date, digitized or not, and what are the issues that will actually get taken away from this. So for me, this is a big job. Please don't expect you turn up to work on Monday and it's all going to be sorted. It won't. When these things are implemented, it won't be perfect. But what we are trying to do is take the material information changes that we saw last November with a few pieces of data, get that right. And once we get that right, we should be able to ratchet up all of the other data once we've got all the data standards in place that you can trust. I hope that wasn't too bitty, Beth, but I've tried to answer all the questions I can and show that actually there's a huge amount of thought gone behind this. There's a huge amount of work going behind this, but also it is a massive job, and it's important we don't overpromise because it's not going to be easy to deliver, but we have to get it done.
And it's a really good point on the trust of the data there, of that data that's being passed on, because I, as a conveyancer, remember back in the 1990s, after the 1980s recession, suddenly all these court cases coming through against conveyancers because they hadn't told lenders things or the information wasn't trustworthy. But John, how are we going to get around that? How are we going to ensure that we can trust the information and that we do know where it's come from?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going through Parliament at the moment. There's something called the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill, and it talks about this concept of a trust framework. I'll go back to use financial services again. If you're a bunch of banks connected via a piece of market infrastructure, let's just take SWIFT as an example. There's two key pieces to that. One is the data standard, and the other thing is the identity framework. So everybody on that network is known. And what happens is when they send a piece of data to another bank, be it a payment instruction, they digitally sign it. So when you have a market infrastructure, when people are connected up, when data is sent from one party to another party over a common market infrastructure, it can be cryptographically signed. We trust wet ink signatures, don't we, on letters, and we used to trust, the king's seal, as it were, a wax seal, and now so in the world of data, it's about a cryptographic signature. But you need a market infrastructure to be able to do that, and so the trust framework sort of sets out a framework for that. And go back on the history of this, if we go back to 2002 and the Land Registration Network, it absolutely spoke about the Land Registry onboarding people onto this Land Registry network, about everyone in that network being a known identity, and then therefore data could flow between them. So what we'll have when we have a trust framework in the property market, we'll have the ability for known businesses, estate agent one, conveyancer two, sending each other some data. It's cryptographically signed, and you will be able to trust the data and verify the data.
We've got a question from Zara. There needs to be checks and balances. If someone is questioning the data, it needs to be taken seriously. Otherwise, we'll end up with another Post Office Horizon situation. How do we avoid that?
I mean, personally, I think that data should always be challengeable by humans. It's not about, there is a dystopian world where AI takes over and we can all just go, we can either go on a beach or go where we want to go, but I don't think that's the world we're talking about. We're talking about being able to send a piece of data from one machine to another, and then if a human looks at that and says, "Oh, I don't believe that. I think that should be something different," then being able to interact with it. So I think ultimately it'll always be humans that come down. The same way if you send a payment to someone and it didn't arrive, you can raise something with your bank and say, "Well, I sent that," and then I'm saying I sent it, and Beth's saying, "Well, she didn't get the £10, so it's gone missing somewhere." There's a discrepancy, and there's protocols for dealing with that. But the vast majority of payments do go through, and people accept the data. So yeah, I think there always needs to be a protocol for humans intervening and challenging and changing data for sure.
And it's a really good point. I mean, Mike, obviously from a conveyancer's perspective, we do everything we can thinking that the transaction is done between genuine parties, but then it gets to Land Registry and Land Registry go, "Nope, seller impersonation fraud." What is there now that we can embrace to avoid that?
Well, COVID was a real shot in the arm for this, actually, because if you remember back to the times when everyone was in lockdown except people who wanted to buy properties, who were out peering through windows, seeing if they could find somewhere to buy, and then struggling to know how they could meet their solicitor, sign documents, ID themselves. So digital ID checking became a technology that was sort of there ripe for the picking, to one that was actually ready to adopt overnight. We looked at it. I mean, we compensate for any fraud over £8 trillion worth of registered property. So to say that we take the risk of fraud seriously is a bit of an understatement, obviously. And when we looked at how do you do ID checking, you have to remember that when I was doing ID checking, a utility bill was actually quite hard evidence, really. But now, of course, anyone could, 10 minutes on Photoshop, create something that looks like a utility bill. So you need to look for what is reliable today and with modern technology, and we looked at ID checking against a passport, facial recognition, and this seemed to be both convenient, really super convenient, because it can be done by anybody from anywhere in the world, and also super secure in comparison to the ways that were traditionally done. So so happy were we with it that we created this standard where we said if you met the standard, then actually we couldn't criticize you as a lawyer for a digital ID check done in this way. And so we created this thing called the safe harbor. Meet the standard and you're in the safe harbor. So that I think has helped a market that was already, as I say, coming through with really super secure and convenient technology, fertile ground of COVID to grow, and digital ID checking. Honestly, I know, technology is not cheap or easy to implement, but it would be top of my list if I was still running a firm to think about, because I just think that not only does it reduce your risk as a firm for the system, I also think it's the most convenient thing for your clients to use. And I'm very hopeful that the market will also drive some use of qualified electronic signatures soon, which is a really good way of removing the inconvenience of having to get your deeds witnessed. Again, you can do it from anywhere in the world because you don't have to find somebody to kind of watch you sign. And it's more secure than electronic signatures, which are available today, and can be tied in with your digital ID check, which you would only have to do once, particularly if, as John says, the Digital ID Trust Framework, which the Department for Science, Innovation, Technology is pushing through Parliament at the moment, comes into force, because then everybody knows that there is this kite-marked way of doing your ID check that everyone can rely on, so the consumer only has to do it once. So if there are two things that I think that, or one thing that's available now that's super helpful to conveyancers, I think it's digital ID checking. That would be probably one of the first things I would look at adopting. And then, I would ask people to ask for qualified electronic signatures. We have been trialing this. We think it works well, but there isn't such a demand from the market that those who could provide it say that it's worth at the moment. It's an obvious investment for them to produce a product.
Certainly from my perspective, I can't remember what I was applying for, but it was the first time that I'd been asked to go onto an app to do the biometric chip read. It was incredibly easy, but I know it's going to be one of those 80-20 rules, isn't it? Because for some people, those sort of things is not a problem at all. For other people, they don't want to be involved with it. But we've still got an analog way to prove identity that we use at the moment. So for those 20%, I suppose, worst case scenario. But John, from your perspective, what about, all of these things, all of these commercial industries coming out, trying to develop them? How are we going to ensure that they all have interoperable data? Richard has asked a question about this, just saying, well, with all the talk about being open, fair, interoperable and usable data, but so many tech providers with commercial interests, how will you bring these all together to provide data in a usable way, and how long will this take? Let's just start off, how are we going to do it in this way? How long will it take? How long is that piece of string, I think?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things that will converge. There's open standards that everyone can adopt, and that means people can organically connect to each other. There are definitely, as Mike said, some great tools around digital ID and qualified electronic signatures. Great example. But ultimately, I think I'll sort of go back to it. But if I look at financial services, you do have sort of the Bank of England almost at the top of the food chain saying, we are going to look at market performance. We're going to have a supervising role across the market, and we're going to have payment infrastructure providers, as it were, coming in. And so not anybody, I can't just set up a company tomorrow to process payments. I need to go through a process to do that. And so there's a limited number of market infrastructure providers, Visa, MasterCard, Swift, etc. So, and I think there will have to be some level of supervision across the market. Notwithstanding what we're saying is there is regulation of individual sectors, but there's no body like the Bank of England that says we are accountable for the performance and supervision of the property market. And I actually think that's a gap that maybe with this sort of trust framework and legislation will happen, because ultimately that there does have to be some form of standards. But as I say, the trust framework legislation does give government the mandation to do a lot of this stuff. You've got the Land Registry Act, so I think that the legislative powers are there. The industry will get so far on its own, but ultimately I think there will be some form of supervision framework for the market going forward.
That's brilliant. Thanks, John. Just to say to everybody who is on this, we at the Digital Property Market Steering Group have a survey that should be launched today, asking actually everybody's opinion, all consumers, all stakeholders, as to actually whether it would help to have some more support and guidance from the industry acting collaboratively to say, well, okay, who's going to get the information, who's going to share the data, and at what point in the transaction. So we've been obviously talking about sharing digital ID, but we've got those other questions about, well, what happens with digital signatures? At the moment, there's an implication that somebody's got to agree that they're going to accept a digital signature so that the conveyancer can do the certificate for the land registry application. But how should that all settle? And I've certainly seen on the Bold Legal Group forums a lot of conversation about whether it should be up to the seller to confirm and control the execution, the digital execution of the documents. Although in fairness, the Land Registry Practice Guide says that whoever is actually initiating that electronic signature, and do correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, that it's up to them to provide the certificate of execution using the digital signature, which of course there is templated wording, but obviously whether it's the seller or the buyer who has initiated as the controlling conveyancer for the digital signature, they will have to submit to the buyer's conveyancer those certificates for them to submit to the Land Registry with their AP1. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, just coming quickly. So, and I think this part of this is sort of habit forming. Once it's a lot of this stuff sounds quite complicated. If you read Practice Guide 82 on this, it's a bit like trying to imagine what a car looks like by reading the Haynes manual first, rather than sitting in the car in the showroom and having a drive. The commercial property world has adopted digital ID and electronic signatures faster, principally because in the commercial world, the genuine kind of corporate deals world, they were already ahead. So the property lawyers in those commercial firms, saw what was happening and just found it much easier to adopt it. So in practice, in a commercial firm, one commercial firm told me, 2/3 of our transactions are all electronically signed. And they know why it's straightforward. Basically, what they do is they phone each other up and say, well, should we use my signing platform or your signing platform? Well, let's use my one. In which case, they know that, they're the ones who input who the signatories are, all of them. They get the printout, or not printout, but you know what I mean, the readout that says it's all been signed. And they then certify, even if they're the seller's solicitors, they certify to the buyer's solicitors, yeah, it's all been done. But basically, it's whose system are we using? And once we've decided that, I'll tell you it's all been done properly, and it's actually quite straightforward. And that's why they're able, to get up to sort of 2/3 of their customers using it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Kate, from your perspective, for the consumer, actually is being able to use the digital signature going to make their life easier? And how do they understand about it? How do they know about it?
So anything like that makes it easier. I saw my mum's house a few years ago. Bless her, she was still with us for a few months till after we'd signed it off. But it was partially owned by me, my sister, and my brother. and my mum who was in a home and it was COVID. So you can imagine the signings and the stress of getting documents from, where am I? So I'm Nottingham to Brightlingsea, who has the worst postal service in the whole wide world, over to Birmingham, and then back to wherever else it needed to go from there. It is a nightmare, and I think that, bearing in mind we have an aging population, there is going to be more documents that need to be signed and more people that maybe jointly own homes because they're in trusts or whatever it might be. So digital signatures have to come in, but then again, they have to be safe. And as far as the consumer side of things is concerned, one of the things we've never achieved, and I mentioned it earlier on, is the kind of faith from the media to do what they do with every other industry I've seen or worked in, is help to educate people. Our media does not educate people on how to buy, sell a home. And they don't, pretty much because they can't make money from an advert next to it, from the chats that I've had with them. However, and as a result, we just get bad property stories. That's all we get. So the education from consumers is, don't bother paying for a decent solicitor because they're all rubbish and they're all going to collapse your sale and it's all going to be horrible. Well, that's not true, is it? So one of the things that I'm hoping you'll see this year, and we're planning for, and we have been working on this and sort of building up for a while, is that if we can get a much better relationship with the media, and if they can see that we're really busting a gut to change and improve the way everybody buys and sells a home, what they will do is they will start working with us. You might think, well, will that ever work? Well, actually, it worked on COVID. Because such an amazing job was done by so many amazing people to make sure that the COVID instructions for buying and selling a home worked from lender through to removal company. And that's why we were allowed to open up the market. And I think our guidance, because it was mostly our guidance with a little bit extra from government, was written by people from the industry and practitioners, be they a one-person office up to a corporate franchise network. It worked. We had less, in fact, I hardly think we had any bad press, whereas most other industries were fighting over the guidance. We didn't, and that was because we'd had so much amazing input from people, free of charge, by the way. So that was the first thing. And the second thing, and actually this was a big thing you're involved with, Beth, the stamp duty. Nightmare, these stamp duty holidays, caused havoc for everybody on this call, I know.
You can't call it a holiday, Kate. You have to call it a discount. We can't call it a holiday. Nobody here felt it was a holiday.
Yeah, no, that's very true, actually. I apologise profusely. So as far as that discount was concerned, what you did and what others did, and I certainly was involved in the conversations, but all I ever do is talk, so that's the only responsibility I have. And all the media came on side and went, if you have not got your offer accepted by November, you will not reach the end of March completion date. And that is the first time I think I've ever been in this business talking to the media. I know they grappled to find stories of people that had missed the deadline. And they really, really struggled because we'd spoken to Treasury and they gave us the extension, but also you got stuff out in the media, and better still, I was on with 5 Live. It was just after the end of June deadline, and they were talking to a guy who missed the end of March deadline, and he only got his completion on 5 to 5 on the end of June deadline. And they went, what would you have done if it hadn't happened? And the guy, I nearly cried because it was such a lovely answer. He said, oh, it wouldn't have been a problem because I'd had a letter from my legal company to say that I might not hit that date. So I had the money ready just in case. Wow. The power of just letters from everybody, from lender through to removal company, to let them know there's a change going, let them know that there's something different, for example, around digital signatures, whatever it might be. It's all about getting the communication right with the industry, understanding how all the new things are going to work between lender and removal, understand who's going to be responsible, and then understand how on earth we communicate that successfully to consumers. We're so close to being able to crack that. And if we crack that, lives will become a lot easier, especially when you digitize all that data.
Fabulous. If only we can do that. So I'm going to give everybody a magic wand now, because we only have 5 minutes to go. And I want to know, Mike, John, Kate, what you would wave your magic wand at to work your magic. So Mike, what would it be for you?
All the data is already digitized and in a common standard, and everybody, if I can use a different analogy to John's, everybody is playing trains on the same gauge track. So it doesn't matter who has what data, everyone can take it from somebody else and immediately consume it and trust it. So I've got 3 things in there.
That's a very magic wand. Come on, John, what would you have if you could have a magic wand?
Well, so if I had £1 million, I could send it to you over faster payments, and it would take, like, it would arrive in a minute's time. So in a future world, you know, if I had a £10,000 garage, a £100,000 house, logging on to Land Registry and being able to transfer it to you as soon as my conveyancer tells me it's safe to do so, in, you know, minutes rather than, you know, the time it will take today. So everyone can see the data, as Mike said, and collaborate on it. The conveyancer does their piece, and they say, John, you're good to go. Log on, press the send button. That would be my vision of the future.
That's fantastic, because I got £1 million out of that. Kate, what would you have?
My magic wand is genuinely, every time something new hits the market, and I'm going to use building safety as an example. I think legal companies are owed, and I'm going to apologise because I know nobody else with an apology, because I don't feel that should have come through with all the responsibilities on your shoulders as it has, and I don't want to see that happen again. So what I want to see is, when everything new, bit material information, building safety, another Japanese knotweed, whatever it is, whatever hits our industry, before it hits, or as soon as it hits, we have that Cobra style meeting, and we work out how the buying and selling process is going to cope and manage this new thing, from lender through to removal company, so that we can cope with these shocks. So much is out of everybody's control, and we have to fight. We won't change these things hitting us, but what we can do is change the way they are introduced into the system, so it's done successfully and smoothly, and we don't have all the understandable sort of upset and issues that we have currently. If we can do that, that works now, and it works into the future.
That's magical. So on that note, thank you very much, everybody, particularly to my panelists, Mike Harlow from Land Registry, John Reynolds from Coadjute, and Kate Faulkner from everywhere, for inputting. And a huge thank you also to all of the people who've posted questions. We will be saving the chat and coming back to anybody that we haven't answered. But a big thank you to you for highlighting all these things. And as I say, please do keep an eye out. That survey from the DPMSG should be out probably about 4 o'clock today. So any moment now, have a look on LinkedIn, you'll see it come through, and then you get to have your say. Send it to everybody you know, whether it's a contact in the industry or whether it's your mum. Everybody has an opinion about actually what should happen when people are moving home. So thank you and goodbye.